Hi everybody, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be with such amazing speakers and energized activists today. So what I wanted to say about this idea of a war against women, a war against decency, a war against humanity, respect for democracy, and all the things that we're facing right now is that unfortunately in this body, this African-American Chickasaw-Choctaw body, this concept of these vehement attacks on this body and my womanhood and my bodily integrity, it's not new to me. And I recall an experience I had in a circle of women featuring Indigenous grandmothers and other women from across the country that I was in a year ago. And we were talking about mentoring, but the circle ended up becoming a conversation about different things that women had experienced related to gender violence and trauma and all sorts of different social injustices, and just feeling the pain of the other women in the room, intergenerational women, women from all sorts of different backgrounds, just overtook me. And I'm good at the stoic face, you know. I remember I would always be in that family where they'd be like, you know, you keep crying, cry until you get it out because it's not going to change anything. Take some action. That was my family. Don't cry. And so when I found myself crying and not really feeling that I could have that control I usually had, I was wondering what overtook me, and this Lakota sister who was there, who I just met but I felt extremely drawn to, put her hand on my shoulder and said, well, you carry the stories of 2 genocides in your body. It's okay to cry. And when she said that, I felt so liberated, so uplifted, that understanding of knowing what it's like to carry that repeated violence, the social violence, the messages, the feeling, the experience, the voices of our ancestors in this body, and know that my body is a story. And so I come here today to talk about these attacks, to say that every time I tell my story, every time that I present my body, I'm telling the stories of my ancestors. I'm reclaiming my body and my voice and theirs. And the energy that really drives me to fight comes from that knowledge that is even beyond me and beyond my understanding of who I am, and understanding that these dehumanizing attacks on our humanity are still escalating generations later, because this is a trend, and it is right now what we're calling the war on women, but it's a long-term core issue about domination and control and power over and not power with. And so today I'm just going to talk about a couple of stories that really led me to want to engage in this fight for equality, and in hopes that my telling my story will empower each of you to tell stories to people in your community, and whatever channel that telling those stories will be in, whether it's person to person, like that woman telling me that story in the circle, or whether you tweet it or put it on a Tumblr, because I think that person-to-person connection is really what changes hearts and minds. And we're in a moment right now where, yes, we need to change policies, but we really need to change our culture and our society that allows this sort of violence, social violence and physical violence, to persist. So the first story I want to mention is, I recall that around age 10, my grandmother and my father told me about this relative of mine who had kind of been a feminist cause celeb in the 70s, and her name was Joanne Little. Does anyone know about her? That's my cousin. And distant cousins. She looks just like my Aunt Linda. When I saw the newspapers about her, it was just really striking to see that again, that shared story. And I heard about her when my family kind of spoke about her with great pride, saying that she had courageously fought back against a white jailer who attempted to rape her when she was in prison in Washington, North Carolina, which is where our homestead is. And I didn't really hear this story again until I read about her in graduate school, read this book, Sex Wars, and was surprised to see some of my family's name in it. And when I read it, that was when I really learned about the depth of her fight for survival, and about the story that made national headlines and really transformed U.S. attitudes about racialized sexual violence and victims' rights. And so when I learned about her case and thought about the lessons and the family values that I think that my family was trying to give me when they taught me about her at first, I really understood about this importance of storytelling, of honoring the dignity of our bodies and our voices by talking about pervasive racism and sexism out loud and sharing those stories, not letting them be be forgotten, because 10, many might think, is a really young age to hear that kind of story, but I think if I hadn't heard that story, I wouldn't be here where I am today doing the work that I do. And so her case galvanized a really diverse movement of activists across the nation, caused many people across movement, labor organizers, women's rights organizers, lots of different organizers to come together, organizers against police brutality, to demand justice for Joan, as well as other women of color, sexual assault survivors, and people in the criminal justice system. And so when Joanne was asked about the case and its impact, she actually said that during her trial, when people asked, what do you think, that they want to sentence you to the gas chamber. This is North Carolina in the 70s. I wasn't born yet, but it really scares me to think about that time. And she actually said, I actually don't believe that. My life is in the hands of the court. My life's in the hands of the people. And so to me, reading that later on, it shows me that she really understood the power of the grassroots and the power of the media support, and that really being the force that was going to determine her life, if she was going to, her fate, if she was going to be acquitted. And so, lo and behold, her prophecy was right. Due to the massive grassroots campaign of support, due to the media response that followed, due to activist pressure, because in the beginning there was this sort of radio silence in the beginning of the case, as we saw with Trayvon Martin in the beginning as well, and many other cases that pertain to black folks and other people of color in the media. She ended up being acquitted, and she escaped this fate of being executed by the state of North Carolina's gas chamber, or just as badly languishing in prison for the simple act of defending herself from sexual violence. And so, for me, her story is super powerful because despite being born into a system that did everything to strip her of her bodily integrity, to undermine her personhood, and to limit her access to resources, she dared to resist, and she asserted her humanity. And her story really imbues me with a continued hope about the power of bearing witness ourselves as well as doing it together, about holding policymakers and law enforcement accountable for supporting each other in the face to threats to our human rights, and also about one woman's love for herself and her people and for justice. And so this fight has really inspired me in this time where we're seeing all these different attacks coming at us right and left, over and under, from every angle, to band together with the collective to defend my own womanhood, to defend my own dignity, and to know that in doing that I'm defending others, and to also stand in solidarity with other people who are also being attacked, because I know that oneness is so important to really think about, because if they're coming for them, they're coming for me next. And so her stories really caused me to understand every time that fear of speaking up has kind of had me in a headlock. I think of her, and it showed me how important it is for me to join in grassroots movements as well as in media activism to demand coverage of violence against women, to demand coverage about these insidious policies, because I know from this family member's story that media coverage literally helped save her life, and she's still alive today. And her story just is evocative of what happens when you stand up and speak, even though others remain silent, when you're the first to make a sound, even when others are silent, and the power of the contagiousness of courage. And the reason I mentioned her story in her life today is because I really think that it's important for us to remember that this is a historic legacy of violence that we have had in this country, and it comes up and has many faces and different names and different times, but it's a trend that's a part of our culture. And so I urge you today to think about ways that you can tell stories and also deeply listen to the stories of others, and not just those that appear directly in front of your face, but maybe those that are hidden in plain view that you might not be listening to. And I hope that with the resources that you have, that you will stand up and like my cousin, be courageously active and fearlessly passionate about defending your life and defending the lives of others. Thank you.
Thank you.